Okay, so listen, I'm about to do the most cliche writery thing imaginable at this point. I'm gonna need you to forgive me. I'm gonna reference Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird. Every writer you'll ever see or hear will at some point reference this book. And there's a reason for that. It's fantastic, especially for anyone wanting to write anything. Essentially, the Cliff Notes version is this. The title of the book comes from a moment when Anne Lamott was younger, when her brother was obsessing over a school project about various kinds of birds. And her father, trying to calm him down, told him, take it bird by bird. People reference this all the time because the inherent lesson is that all great things are done on a step-by-step basis. Screenplays are no exception. So when I finally sit down to write my script, I do that. I take it bird by bird. Now in screenwriting, 1 page of a script generally equals 1 minute of screen time. So if you think you're going to be writing a 2-hour movie, then that's going to be roughly 120 pages. So by marking points in your clock with page numbers, you can actually break your clock down to individual pages. This will allow you to plan your entire script out down to the page if you wanted to. I like to call this micro-clocking, whereas the macro clock is generally beat-by-beat outline of your story. The micro clock is literally taking the clock and breaking it down to a page-by-page battle plan. Personally, I found micro-clocking your whole movie up front to be a waste of time, as it's a lot of work, and your story is going to be evolving and changing as you write it, ultimately affecting the page-by-page details of your story. The best way to micro-clock, I've found, is bird by bird, in small increments, as you go, usually when you sit down in the morning and plan what you're going to try and knock out that day. The ideal number of pages accomplished per day varies for each writer. For me, 10 pages is a massive accomplishment. I tend to come in closer in between 5 and 7, if that, but for all intents and purposes, I like to micro-clock 10 pages every morning. So I'll sit down and starting where I left off the day before, I'll figure out what in my macro clock happens over the next 10 pages. So maybe yesterday I left off on page 10. My main character, Indiana Jones, has just returned from South America where he failed to retrieve the Chachapoyan fertility idol. Today, I want to try and get to page 20, which according to my macro clock is when Indy needs to be boarding a plane to Nepal to find Marion Ravenwood. So between now and then, I have to bring my inciting incident, which in this case would be the government men arriving and informing Indy of Hitler's plans to find and utilize the Ark of the Covenant. I need to establish what the Ark of the Covenant is, and I need to hint at a history with Marion. So, I roughly block that out over 10 pages. I guesstimate how long I imagine each scene lasting, and I decide exactly what page I want each of those things to happen. And I allot for that number of pages for it, and I assign specific page numbers for each scene. For me, this helps me feel like I have a safe structure to play in, knowing that if at any point I hit a wall or feel uninspired, I can lean back on this blueprint and just focus on getting to the next page. Worst case scenario, I can just look at what page I'm on and force myself to say, okay, Indy needs to be getting on a plane on the next page, or Indy needs to be talking about Marion on the next page, or the government news needs to show up on the next page. And then I'm just going to write toward that, even if it feels forced. It frees me of the pressure to be a genius. Not every word needs to be inspired. Sometimes it's just work. And the good news is you can and will come back to it later. What's important right now is just getting a first draft done. Doing this daily routine of micro-clocking your day's pages, you'll find your macro clock changing and evolving in ways you didn't expect. And this is good. Trust your story. Don't work too hard to engineer it into what you originally envisioned. Like I've said this whole time, we're using these structural tricks to try to excavate this story from our brain, not to create it from scratch. As we dig it up, it may not fit our structure perfectly, so we should be flexible and willing to adjust as we go. Your homework? Micro-clock your first 10 pages. And if you're feeling dangerous, start writing them. Do it! Go!